First up, we have Kang's Endless Army, 7 mana paladin legendary spell, resurrect 3 friendly mechs. They keep any magnetic upgrades. Resurrecting minions is a useful way to gain powerful stats, provided the minion is adequately strong. Priest decks with Diamond Spellstone accomplish this by not including small minions, with the smallest historically being Barns. But this card is more similar to Witching Hour, in that it brings back an exclusive type of minion. This means that it's a viable strategy to keep weaker non-mechs in the early game and more powerful mechs in the late game. And this is all without considering the magnetic bonus. That basically makes this spell bring back extra minions, with the caveat that said minions are attached to a mech. The player just needs to be careful to avoid playing a mech without a magnetic boost, or risk summoning that minion. Overall, the power of this card is fantastic to behold, if the resources and pieces are invested properly. I nearly gave this a crafted golden, but this card definitely has weaknesses, counters, and requirements that prevent it from being that high, similar to Witching Hour. So instead, amazing if used right, an excellent capstone for a magnetic paladin. Next, we have Deadringer, 2 mana 2/1 priest mech, Death Rattle, draw a Death Rattle minion from your deck. This card is fairly simple. Ignoring the mech part, this card is comparable to Loot Hoarder. The difference is that this card uses precision draws, which can be useful if there are specific cards from the deck that the player wants to use. For example, a deck with a spell-heavy OTK would prefer Loot Hoarder, but one with an unusual N'Zoth-like combination would like this card. And would you look at that, an unusual N'Zoth-like combination was announced. I'll worry about that card later this week. Back on track, this card can hypothetically be more useful than a Loot Hoarder, but can also hypothetically be worse. This is especially true if it's in the wrong deck. As such, it's decent, good if used correctly. Moving on, we have Reckless Experimenter, 5 mana 4/6 priest minion. Death Rattle minions you play cost 3 less, but die at the end of the turn. Fascinating stuff here. Compare and contrast with Corpse Widow, which has the same stats, the same cost, and nearly the same effect. But this destroys the minions you manage to play, wasting their stats. Well, no need to waste my time here. I can't imagine killing my own minions to be of any use. Mostest stupidest. I'm kidding. The key to this card is to use it with minions that have death rattles that are better than the minions themselves. For example, take Sylvanas. This card's weakness is that most of the time, the opponent decides where the death rattle lands, and oftentimes makes it land nowhere. With this card, the result is much more significant, being akin to Deadly Shot and Mind Control having a baby, and that's for 3 mana. Here's another example, Eggs. Famous Jake! Notice me! Notice me! With this, a Devilsaur Egg is a 0 mana 5/5, which makes this combo comparable to Arcane Tyrant. That is nothing to scoff at. So this card has plenty of powerful combinations, especially in a well-crafted Death Rattle deck. Though the card is still pretty clunky, so it's a little shy of being called amazing. It's definitely decent though, and judging from some of the other cards Priest has, I anticipate it will be a powerful addition to Death Rattle Priest. Onwards, we have Faithful Lumi, 1 mana 1/1 mech, Battlecry, give a friendly mech +1/+1. Don't underestimate this scrawny little guy. This is comparable to being a 2/2 with partial charge, provided another mech can take the boost. In Wild, this isn't hard whatsoever. In Standard, I'm sure it'll be possible to figure it out. This card is simple enough that I don't feel the need to elaborate. It's pretty good, provided it's in a fairly fast mech deck. Not a Paladin mech deck though, since Paladin mech decks use card mechs good with the mechs in their decks, such as Magnetic Mechs, to make the mech deck with tech that synergizes with big mechs. A minute mech is bad tech for this deck, since new card effects that make mechs mismanage minuscule mechs like this one. You guys know what I'm talking about. Next, we have Omega Agent. 5 mana 4/5 Warlock minion. Battlecry, if you have 10 mana crystals, summon 2 copies of this minion. This card is a bit more polarized than Omega Defender, being very subpar if played early, and very powerful if played late. Then again, that's pretty much what Omega cards are supposed to be. However, this card has a significant weakness. It's 5-costed, which is a world of difference from 4 mana, since when you reach 10 mana, this can take half of your resources. Partner that with subpar stats in the earlier part of the game, and this card is pretty limited, being a bane in the middle game and a bit too clunky in the late game. Emerald Spellstone generally outclasses this card, just because that card can actually be played on turn 5 and often has similar stats. While Omega Defender is pretty good, yes, I changed my mind, I'm allowed to do that, this card is just fun for the arena. Though to be fair, it's very fun for the arena. Don't underestimate it there. Next we have Omega Medic, 3 mana 3/4 priest minion. Battlecry, if you have 10 mana crystals, restore 10 health to your hero. Much better. Priest is a pretty defensive class, meaning 10 mana is fairly obtainable. Couple that with healing helping with obtaining security, and that this card has perfect stats for its costs, and we have a very useful card all around. Okay in the early game, great in the late game. Thus, it is pretty good. I don't think I need to flesh this out anymore. Once upon a time, Spider Tech was a meta card, and this card has those same pros, plus the potential to be a better anti-Keel bot. Moving on, we have Lab Recruiter. 2 mana 3/2 rogue minion, Battlecry, shuffle 3 copies of a friendly minion into your deck. Poor Gang Up. I love that card, but now this is just better. Sure, you can't target enemy minions with this, but when has anyone ever used that part of the card? From a purely non-synergistic standpoint, this card prevents 3 cycles of the fatigue counter, which in some matchups is pointless and in others prevents dozens of points of damage. Though that's dependent on if Rogue can get to fatigue. And please, whoever heard of a Rogue deck managing to make it to fatigue? That's sarcasm, I know Miracle Rogue exists. I also know Myra's Unstable Element exists, which is now a one-way ticket to making preposterous situations with this card. Myra's Recruiter, Omega Defender, Recruiter, Omega, Omega, Recruiter, etc. I mean, it's no Jade Idol, but it's still pretty cool. In the end, this card is just decent, but the pieces to use it are definitely there. Now Rogue has 2 different ways to create bottomless decks. Lucky us. Onwards, we have Weaponized Pinata. 4 mana 4/3 mech, Death Rattle, add a random legendary minion to your hand. Awesome! Love it! Very cool, very flavorful, fantastic design. But it's only fun for the arena. A random legendary is rarely going to be stronger than, for example, a card draw, since legendaries are oftentimes very circumstantial, and other times even less than that. Legendary equates to weird, making this card random weirdness. Maybe it's worth putting in a Death Rattle mech deck if the player wants a little bit of flavor. I wouldn't recommend it though. Next we have Demonic Project. 2 mana Warlock spell. Each player transforms a random minion in their hand into a demon. Oh my god, yes! Dirty Rat, your legacy is complete! The fascinating thing about cards like this is how they can thoroughly destroy certain strategies. Worried about N'Zoth? Now it's a Blood Imp. Malagos? Nope, that's a Succubus. Is your opponent saving Flubbinous Flute for something? Presto, now it's Jiraxu! That might actually be a problem. However, not a problem we can't solve. Sacrificial Pact is a card that is quite strong if the opponent has demons. With this card, that's guaranteed, making for a strong synergy. But penniless, I don't want to run Sacrificial Pact. Worry not, sir, for the mere possibility that you might be running Sacrificial Pact will make your opponent hesitate to play the card. Is this a perfect solution? Probably not, but who cares? You just turned Shudderwalk into Illidan, so celebrate! Of course, the player needs to be careful as well, since one of their minions will likewise become demonic. In the right deck, that shouldn't be a problem. Simply put in some circumstantial minions that can then transform into something more versatile, if necessary. Small aside, it's worth noting that both players will know the other's demon, and the other's transformed minion. So plan smart. Don't expect to surprise them with that Doomguard you just got. In the end, this card is clearly tech, and given the nature of how the game has been for several years, I'm willing to also say it's amazing in most metas. Combo decks have a new monster in the closet. Warlock. Up next, we have Unexpected Results. 4 mana mage spell, summon 2 random 2-cost minions. This spell summons higher cost minions the more spell damage you have. 3 cost if spell damage +1, 7 cost if spell damage +5, etc. Let's put aside the spell damage for now. If the card rolls average stats for its 2-drops, then it's not that bad, comparable to Serenite Chain Gang. But that's not super likely. Battlecry minions and unusual effects are generally going to make this card roll lower stats. Sure, it's possible to instead get double millhouses, but what are the odds of that? 0.1%. It's a 0.1% chance. I did the math. Anyways, the general spread leaves this card on the weaker end, but what about spell damage? Surely that ups the power significantly. Each spell damage makes this card summon minions that are each, on average, worth 1/1 in stats more. so for 1 spell damage, the value increases by 2/2 in stats. That is neat, except for one thing. Spell damage is typically tied to minions with low tempo. This card is meanwhile a tempo card. As such, the synergy does not adequately align. That spell damage might be better used to push the face rather than to try securing the board. So that detail doesn't matter particularly much. At best, it's a clunky way to maybe get this card slightly stronger, just like normal spell damage. In the end, fun for the arena, since the card is still okay. This would need some serious spell damage synergies to be able to work on the latter. Next we have Celestial Emissary, 2 mana 2/1 Mage Elemental. Battlecry, your next spell this turn has spell damage +2. Oh. We'll get to that synergy later. First, let's talk about spell damage. Some people worry about the burst damage this card can theoretically provide. This is kinda silly. Casting Fireball in an opponent's face right after playing this would be the same as if this card had Battlecry deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. That's not exceptionally strong. Playing 2 of these and a Fireball would be an 8 mana 3 card Pyroblast that also summons 2/1 elementals. Even if that's decent, it still requires all the cards be played at once, so people thinking that this card is strong with burn are sadly mistaken. Spell damage is strongest when the spell itself only does a little bit of damage. Arcane Explosion and Moonfire are the best examples. So this card would hypothetically be best with those, but in those cases it only proves to be slightly stronger than say Hellfire, or Consecration, or Frostbolt. The fact that this spell damage is only active for 1 spell is also a weakness. Spell damage is best when played not just with small spells, but with multiple spells. This card further avoids that. Finally, we have the Unexpected Results combo. If you play this card with that, it becomes a 6 mana 2 card combination that summons 2 random 4-drops. And a 2/1. That's underwhelming. Paladin, meanwhile, has a spell that summons 3 massive mechs for only 1 mana more. Okay, so clearly I'm not a fan of this card, which is odd because it seems like everyone loves the thing. But no matter what spells I pair it with, this card just seems to fall short. There are very few cases where I would choose this card over Kobold Geomancer, and the few that I would are very, very circumstantial. Part of me wants to give this card a Mostus Stupidus, just to drive home how poorly this card does its job. But it's not that bad. Get this card off a Menacing Nimbus and you'll find a use for it. But sadly, this card is definitely lacking. Finally, we have Dr. Boom Mad Genius. 7 mana hero card that gives 7 armor. Wow, real classy, Blizzard. Battlecry, for the rest of the game, your mechs have Rush. Hero power, Big Red Button, which does 5 different things, chosen randomly each turn, but never the same one back to back. Micro Squad, summon 3 1/1 Microbots. Zap Cannon, deal 3 damage. Blast Shield, gain 7 armor. Kaboom, deal 1 damage to all enemies. And finally, Delivery Drone, discover a mech. Magnificent! My only problem with Hagatha was that the hero power was sometimes too random, being inconsistent for some players and feeling unfair to others. But randomness can still be exciting, and this card keeps that factor while still having a sense of strategy. Getting the right hero power might be a matter of luck, but once you have one, it's up to you if you want to invest the resources to use it. And each of these effects is still strong enough that, despite inconsistency, it's probably still worth playing this card even if you don't have many mechs. With mechs though, more power to you. It's worth noting that this card is very defensive, giving extra armor to the hero and rush to the mechs. This makes it a decent capstone for a mid-range deck, similar to Deathstalker Rexar, but Control can take advantage of this card's power for longer. The rush effect practically prevents the opponent from gaining control of the board, unless they drain the player's hand of cards, so Control decks simply need to avoid doing that. In the end, this card does its job as a hero card perfectly. It slows the game down and gives an advantage as the game goes on for longer. It still has weaknesses, since the first turn it only gives 7 armor, but the strengths of the card easily outweigh that. Craft this card golden, and enjoy yourself while pushing this random button.